بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين لله تبارك وتعالى. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. We welcome you all to another edition of the Black Imams Roundtable. And I am Imam Amin Muhammad. Joining me for this session is our beloved Imam Faheem Lee. Missing from this session is our beloved Imam Naeem Abdullah, who should be tuning in the comments, and our brother Sheikh Yahya Baltimore, and our young brother, beloved Imam Muawiyah. We're gathered tonight to discuss a very important topic, which is titled Critically Thinking Through the Creed. And the basis for this conversation was the video that we talked about the other day, where a few well-known popular speakers on the Islamic lecture circuit were talking about Aqidah, and from different points of view. And we wanted to have our input on that subject. So we asked you to listen to it, and I hope all of you did listen to it thoroughly so that you could follow the discussion, because I think everything has context, and I think context is very important. And sometimes I think we all want to see unity in Islam. And what that looks like to different people is different. It's not always a one-dimensional thing. It has layers. So I wanted to, from our side of Black imams, teachers in the African American community, because we weren't represented in that discussion, I wanted to hear what we would say about that issue and how it would look from our side, from our experience. And one of the things that I would hope tonight that I left, and you can make your own, and we welcome you to comment. I left after watching several times. I watched the video, and I left feeling empty in terms of a firm point, especially in terms of identifying the creed, identifying Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, identifying truly how we can work together without compromising our religious principles. I didn't feel that was clearly articulated. Not saying it wasn't articulated at all. I didn't feel that, yeah, this is something to walk away with. I still felt that there was much more input, context, and clarification that was needed in that discussion. And so, but I wanted to hear it from our side, because something in it, and I'll close my opening comments with this, was one of the speakers was speaking about America and what Islam is in America and how Americans need to deal with these issues. And what I felt from that was that person wasn't really aware of the various strands of understanding within America, right? So what would work for one segment of Muslims in America is totally different from another segment, right? The same type of discussion won't sound the same in different places in America. So one context doesn't represent all of us, right? And nor one does that approach even work for all of us. So I felt that we needed to have some input. And this is all from my side. And each of our beloved brothers will have their view on the topics. So I'm going to stop there. I have a lot to say, but I want to hear everyone's view on these issues. And I'll pass to our beloved brother, Imam Faheem.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsani ila yawmiddin. Alhamdulillah, thank you all for joining us tonight. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this opportunity to speak again. I'm happy to be here with my esteemed imams and panelists and sheikhs and doctors. Alhamdulillah. Thank you all for joining us tonight, mashallah. Please remember to share this on your platform so we can get around those algorithms, and also to make sure you drop that bread on us. We suggest $10, a session, inshallah. We should be able to cover that quickly and efficiently, because all y'all got all that, y'all got that anchor money, know y'all got that anchor money, you know what I mean? Break off a couple crumbs of them breads y'all hold, them loaves of bread y'all holding up. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make your loaf grow exponentially. Amin. Alhamdulillah. All right. So following up what Imam Amin was mentioning, should we share the link or should you? I can't hear you. You said to share the link? Yeah, you still on mute, Imam.
I just put it up.
Okay.
I mean, they can look at it afterwards and get more.
Yeah, so part of the discussion that we're going to be talking about is in this link. And in the link, you have Dr. Yasser Qadi. You have Sheikh Asrar Rashid from the UK, or over the pond, as they call it. And then we have a moderator by Dr. Shadi Al-Masri, one of our New Jersey favorites, alhamdulillah, who moderated the talk very well, alhamdulillah. And so from what I gathered from it, the talk was surrounding Aqidah, and they had this concept called applied Aqidah. And what I gathered from it is that they were talking about how to apply or how to practice, traditional Islam and applying Aqidah, or other words, what should people know about Aqidah, what is necessary for them, and what should people be engaging in, and how do we find the common ground of how to deal with these issues, especially in light of all of the different views and stuff like that. So the backdrop, if you all know, is that if we being honest, one of the speakers, Dr. Yasser Qadi, is a very, very learned individual, but he he has some what's the word I'm looking for? He has some potential. He has some potential. Let's put it like that. And so if you ever heard him talk recently, he's come out and he's denounced, he kind of the Wahhabi kind of doctrine. But then there's still, for those who, follow these things in detail, that there's a whole movement about people who denounce like Salafiyah and denounce, following Saudi Arabia scholarship. But then there's still this element of, relying on Ibn Taymiyyah, and so there's a whole mix up sometimes in how these people approach issues, because when those are the things that they rely on, it's not from a traditional perspective. So the backdrop is someone who isn't following traditional Islam, and who often says, that and in this talk, he says that he's not a card-carrying member of any kind of dogma. So what that meant is that, he doesn't necessarily ascribe to what has been traditional classical Islam by following the Ashari and Maturidi schools in the four madhahib, Hanafis, Maliki, Shafis, and the Hanabila, and any of you or many of you probably are familiar that many people who come from that strand, because he mentions this word Islamic strands, they pick and choose for what they feel is suitable according to their own intellect sometimes, so for instance, and that's a whole nother topic about how they can look into the books of the scholars of the past and decide for themselves what is appropriate, what is suitable, and things like that. And then you have Sheikh Asrar Rashid, may Allah preserve him, who's a lion, for Ahl Sunnah over there in the UK. And he was just, really sticking to the traditional method of relying on the past schools and the past schools of fiqh and schools of Aqidah. So I took down a few notes. So the first question that Dr. Shadi asked is that how is it applied? So I think he was implying when he asked that question, how does the common person, and they classify people besides scholars and teachers and imams, they classify people as being educated laity, meaning someone who's a level above the awam, and then just like the general folk. And so the backdrop seems to be like, how does someone navigate through worldly life and applying Aqidah, like how should they believe? So Sheikh Asrar, he started with that a person should start with knowing about Qadr and Qadar, knowing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees and what Allah wills. And then he said, because this relates to your provision. And when you observe the effects of when you study the names and attributes of Allah, and then knowing things like knowing the dunya is temporary, like a lot of things that, will be cause a deficiency in our iman when we live, we navigate through this world, we become anxious, we become depressed, we lose hope sometimes, and all those things. So he was saying that really coming to terms with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed, and once a person learns that, that really helps them to gain their trust and their hope, So then Dr. Yasser, he said that, we start with the Quranic revelation and the impact that it has on the people during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, what impact it had on them, and how the early the early surahs, the Meccan surahs, they concentrated on Tawheed and the Akhirah and, the stories of the Anbiya and stuff like that. And then he said, then the Prophet ﷺ being the best example. And, so that's where we should start. How did, what impact did the word of Allah have on the companions? And when you read these stories, how it changes their hearts. And that's one approach that we have to help us, like in these modern times of, what a lot of our brothers and sisters are faced with, and in a particular community, they're faced with a lot of, atheism and, these scientific kind of developments that are contrary to Islam. And then they're in these universities and stuff, and they learn about all of these, philosophy. And a lot of people who come from that community, they're kind of stuck sometimes, and these people are intellectual. Then one of the things that Dr. Yasser mentioned is that a lot of people are learning these things and then feeling okay that you can separate religion from it, or you can separate Islam from it. Like, you don't have to be practicing the deen to be spiritual or be a righteous person. And so you have a growing number of Muslims who, might not be praying and might not be observing things, or might not accept traditional principles that have been passed down through generations because they think they're no longer applicable, things like that. And so then the next thing, Sheikh Yasser said, Dr. Yasser, excuse me, we had beef about this. Dr. Yasser, he said that we need to, reevaluate religious discourse and theology. So in other words, he said that the classical books, they were written for specific times, and that our current priorities that we face, that it should cause us to reframe the issues and not just regurgitate old works. So in other words, he was saying that, those books are good for those times, and the things that we're facing, almost like, we can refer to them, but they're not going to really have an impact on the issues that we're dealing today. And so then he mentioned a term called Kalam 3.0 that he used. He borrowed from Sheikh Hamza Karamali. May Allah preserve him. And so then Sheikh Asrar, he responded to this saying, like, you know, he disagreed with Sheikh Hamza Karamali, saying, like, you know, that so this term Kalam 3.0 meaning like a new Kalam, you know, like we're not going to use the terms and the principles of the Kalam of old. We're just going to try to rephrase it, you know, reword it, you know, things like that. So he said, Sheikh Asrar said, I don't agree with that. He said, because when you do the application of Kalam, he said that all of the classical books have already discussed hundreds of thousands of years before even some of these Westerners started discussing these things in detail. So when you go to those classical books, you know, dealing with issues of Aqidah and theology and all of these things, and then he mentioned some Western scholars like Immanuel Kant, and I forget the other one he mentioned, that these things that they're discussing in their later times, that the Muslims have already discussed these books, discuss these issues in detail. So if you refer to them and just use a traditional method, you don't really have to, you know, like saying that they're for their time, but just read them and then just knowing how to apply them in the right way. And if you don't apply them in the wrong way, that's the problem that people are having, because they're reading these books without any training, without any classical training, and then they're taking what they want from it, and then people becoming confused, and then they associate that with traditional Kalam, you know. And so then he said, Sheikh Asrar, he said that the old books covered these issues in detail, and classical Kalam smashes current theological arguments. He said they smash current theological arguments. So in other words, we don't have to bypass those books or thinking that they're books of old. They're just as fresh, as new as when they were written, and they're very suitable for the times. In other words, we don't have to bypass the tradition, you know, to really deal with these issues that we're talking about now, because they've already been discussed. All right. So then Dr. Shadi, you know, he was a very good moderator. So he was interjecting, asking questions. He was giving his own commentary. And then, you know, it's all types of shade was thrown in there if you paid attention, you know, because they was taking shots at him, but in a way that you had to really peep what's going on. So he said about responding to doubts with a Western refutation, and what is the methodology? In other words, what is the methodology that we should use as Muslims in the West that Sheikh Dr. Yasser, can we say Sheikh Dr. Yasser? Do we have no response?
I'm not going to object at the moment.
Not the moment. Behind the scenes, we can. So Dr. Yasser basically, you know, saying that with Western methodology, we have to use a new kind of approach, and so it gives you this feeling about this whole kind of reformist kind of movement from people like Dr. Yasser and other people who he's learned from. You know, that, you know, the old way, we don't need it. We just take the, you know, we learn new ways and we take what we want from the old way, but not using traditional Islam as a whole, you know. And so Dr. Shadi brings that question about responding to doubts with the Western refutation, like how do we go about it? And so Dr. Yasser said that if all of the classical traditions were to put something together to refute like atheism and stuff like that, he's saying that there will be no real tangible difference in it. Like, so he's basically saying like they will all come up with the same view. So in other words, if they came up with the same view, then in modern times, it will work for us to use it in the way that we do, because it would be like the same thing. And then Dr. Shadi, excuse me, he said that what will be the usul to counter the ideas of how to contradict people who have a different theology from us. So he was really trying to tie him down, like, what is your usul? You know, what is your methodology? What is your approach? You know, because you don't seem to tie into the classical approach, you know, of the two schools of Aqidah and the four schools of fiqh. You know, you don't seem to tie into that. And, you know, you've heard him on numerous talks where he, you know, like I mentioned earlier, he said he's not a card-carrying member of any dogma. He's not tied down to one particular thing, you know. So and that in itself is a methodology. Dr. Shadi said that as well. So if you do that, not tying down, and you're being all over, then that in itself is a methodology. And then Sheikh Yasser said, so he tried to explain his methodology. He said that his usul would be looking at the paradigms of groups who oppose us, and he meant us, Ahl Sunnah. That's another discussion, right? And he said the way to approach it, the methodology is to see what these different groups who oppose us in Aqidah, where are they coming from? What's the foundation? What's the underlying matters of it? What are the issues? And then he said, look at the internal confrontations that they have with each other, these movements, how they split, and then he said to look at the results of those movements and take all of that and use that methodology that he just said as a way of refutation. And so then Sheikh Asrar followed up. He said, no, we have already a methodology. And then he referenced the creed of Sanusi, he talks about, the Ahkam al-Aql, and then, the senses and, Khabar, Tawatir. He mentioned all of these concepts. This is our methodology. That's how we process information. What has come to us as widely accepted narrations that are truthful, and we use this, and then we base that on what we receive from other people, and we use that as a judge, not to go the other way. So, and basically said, you use the same old traditional method that we've been using for thousands of years because it's tried and true. It's tried and true. And everybody who has come after that, and they haven't used this methodology, have went and, they went to extremes and they went into deviance, and they stepped into areas where they just, went off the mark, And so then, and he mentioned again, he said that he mentioned ma'rifah in his talk about that's a form of knowledge. And so Dr. Shadi asked Sheikh Asrar, what is the meaning of ma'rifah? Because he knows that's, a term in Sufi methodology, Sufi terminology. So he said, he just said basically that ma'rifah is love and increase in iman, and we must inculcate love in the hearts of young people. And then he said ma'rifah is basically sweetness of faith. So he was talking in general, but he was saying like, use the traditional method that's always been here. You don't need to come up with anything on your own because we're in new times, because if that's the case, then down the line, someone will say, we need to come up with new hadith. We need to come up with new verses of the Quran. If you go that, because you can open up doors that should not be open, if you take that methodology. And then he said that all of these modern arguments that we're trying to use a Western approach with philosophy and science and all that, and then mix a deen with it, these already been discussed in detail. So if you go to the old books, they're going to bring what's new to you already. It's going to, these arguments are nothing new, basically what he's saying. And then Dr. Shadi, he asks Sheikh Yasser, Dr. Yasser, what is the number one issue that he would want for the educated laity to address first? So Sheikh Dr. Yasser, I keep Dr. Yasser, he came up with this topic about what he calls the educated laity. So he's saying that with people who are educated, they're a level above the awam, and that, they have access to information, they have access to books, they have access to teachers. And although they may not be studying in the traditional method, they're not just someone who will have to rely on someone totally, like they wouldn't, how they should be doing taqlid, but they might have a little more sense, to understand things, but they're still not any kind of real level, So he was talking about these people. So he said, what's the number one issue that you would expect these people to learn first to have like soundness of faith? And then he said that people need to increase in love. So, Dr. Yasser was basically talking about, how levels of people, like people are regular and people have a little bit more education. Then you have teachers and you have scholars and you have real shuyukh. And then, all of these are categorized, and then, so he said the first thing for regular people is that we increase love, and he said a nice line here. He said, Our job as teachers is to encourage, to nourish, encourage to nourish. So he said that we should be encouraging people to nourish their hearts and mind and have love for Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that he said intellectual doubts should among college youth, where a lot of them are having problems when they get to college, they need to be addressed. And he said we should be able to come to terms while maintaining our differences. So he said that we should be able to come to common terms. And then Sheikh Asrar said the same thing. And he mentioned a few other things, but I'm going to stop there because I know you all have a lot to offer, especially Imam Amin. But overall, I thought it was pretty good. It wasn't what, you know, when you see it and you see those three personalities there, and you know, it almost looked like a versus. That's what you would think when you first saw it. You know, like, oh man, they're gonna go at each other. You know, and so, but it really wasn't that. And at the end, Dr. Shadi, he said he tried to, what did he say? He said, I want to throw some spice your way or something. He said, you know, he tried to tie Dr. Yasser Qadi down to straight methodology, because I think that's one of the issues, excuse me, with the people who know him, and, you know, they respect his academia, but then there's this all over the place where he's at. So they were trying to tie him down. Like, what is the methodology? Because there's already a methodology that's, you know, 1,200 years in the making, you know. So what is your methodology, and why is it that you are taking a different approach? You know, what gives you that, you know, what really gives you that right to do so and to be so outspoken about it, you know? So that's what I got out of it. And I'll leave the rest to you all, inshallah.
So we'll go to Sidi Muawiyah, because Sayyidi, you got to watch the whole video. Sheikh Yahya didn't get the whole thing, so he can catch the gist of, you know, the gist of what's being said and add to it. So it's better that we go first.
Okay. طيب أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين نوين التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء للهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله وقربه ومرضاته سبحانه وتعالى. I think the first thing that Imam Amin, Hafidhullah, he mentioned was that he didn't feel that the creed was clarified correctly in the video, or something to the effect of that. And I would have to say that I disagree with that, and I may be a bit biased, as I'm a great admirer of Sheikh Asrar, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, and his lessons and his durus and his teaching were one of the things that were instrumental in myself, you know, coming towards Sunni Islam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him and preserve him. But like, rather, I think that the point of the video was more so to discuss how can we, despite our differences in aqidah, in our differences in belief, how can we work together more effectively as Muslims, basically, despite our differences with one another. Because I think for anybody that knows the speakers in the video, for Sheikh Asrar, his mawqif on almost all of these matters is well known. He's a person that has spent his life and his time defending the aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and promoting it, in, you know, refuting and teaching against those people that would oppose it. In regards to Sheikh Yasser, or Dr. Yasser, I think that the point was they themselves were trying to see where Dr. Yasser is at. You know, how far has Dr. Yasser come in his knowledge, in his understanding of Islam? Because, you know, in my humble opinion of Dr. Yasser, and, you know, forgive me for saying this, I think that Dr. Yasser is a bit traumatized, basically. He's a bit traumatized by his experience within the Salafi/Wahhabi movement. In this trauma that he has, it has caused him to go to the opposite direction. He's gone from one extreme, which is the extreme of Wahhabism, Salafism, the Najdi Da'wah, whatever you want to call it, And he's gone to the other extreme of trying to reform the religion entirely. Because this is what happens when you're inside of a movement that's so close-minded, that's so hostile towards the rest of the Muslims. And now, because of that, he associates any sort of attachment to a movement, any type of attachment to a da'wah, any type of attachment to a set standard of learning. His trauma associates that to the Salafi movement, and he has to run away from it. And this is the reality of a movement that, you know, was built off of the takfir and the tabdi' of Muslims and the opposition of the majority of the Muslim nation. So because he was raised in that movement and he was trained in that movement, and he's trying his best to get away from anything that even reminds him of that movement in terms of methodology when it comes to dealing with people or anything like that. You know, I think that's the reason for his, you know, running towards the reformist ideology. And, you know, Allahu Alam, because, you know, and it seems that he's still even struggling. You know, it's coming to him step by step, but to leave off all of the traces of that movement. Because as Imam Faheem, he mentioned, it's well known that Sheikh Yasser has pretty much denounced Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. He's denounced the takfir in the tabdi' culture of the Salafis, and even pretty much renounced their entire understanding of shirk and kufr and tawheed as they know it. But he's still holding on to, for example, the ideas of Ahmed ibn Taymiyyah in Aqidah. So, you know, he seems like he's between two things, you know, and Allah knows best. But I think that in regards to Dr. Yasser also, his tendency towards reformism and his complete lack of clarity when it comes to, you know, telling people what exactly is his methodology in creed, what exactly is his methodology even in fiqh, what is his methodology in anything Islamic. I think it's very indicative of his lack of training, the closed-mindedness of the Salafi movement, because he was trained in a movement and trained in an ideology that it does not really teach you how to deal with the issues of the modern world, because they shun the aql, they shun ilm al-kalam, they shun all of these things. So what happens is that the way they're trained in the deen makes them wholly unprepared to deal with these challenges in the modern world. So what that now turns into, I need to abandon the religion, I need to now abandon the tradition to defend the religion against these modern ideas. Whereas we didn't see this in the case with Sheikh Asrar. MashaAllah, Sheikh Asrar is a person who studied the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and he studied with the Kibar of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And he consistently showed throughout the entire discussion how, just as the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah was applicable in its time when it was written by the scholars of Al-Islam over 1200 years ago, it's just as applicable today. But it's about studying the tradition and learning application. And he gave many examples of that. I think he mentioned Sheikh Hassan Habannaka, I believe, and also Sheikh Mustafa Sabri, rahimahullah, as examples of ulama who took the classical kalam of the Asha'ira in the Maturidiyya, and they also were able to then apply it to modern ideas completely dismantle them. And he mentioned, for example, Sheikh Mustafa Sabri's work, Mawqif al-Aql, the position of the aql, the intellect in al-Islam, where Sheikh Mustafa Sabri, he completely demolishes the ideas of the atheists and the philosophers and secularism and all these ideas that the Muslim world, that the secular world, and all of these doubts that Muslims are facing, how Sheikh Mustafa Sabri was able to completely destroy all of these ideas and show their flawedness using nothing but classical kalam. He simply took the ideas that the classical ulama taught and he was able to apply it to these modern ideas. And Sheikh Asrar, in the video, he also mentioned a point that just simply understanding something as simple as what is mustahil aqlan and what is mustahil adatan. And just understanding the rational judgments in general in Aqidah can completely dismantle many of the doubts and the problems that Muslims go through in facing things like atheism, scientism, all these modern doubts, etc. So I think throughout the debate, the discussion that the two had, alhamdulillah, Sheikh Asrar was able to show that, and that Sheikh Yasir was shown to. Sheikh Yasir has a lot of, I would say, he has good ideas and he has good intentions for the ummah, but his trauma and his still trying to get over the effects of the Salafi movement, it has caused him to go every which way. He's very, 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 very unclear in his methodology. He's very unclear in, what exactly his ideas and his position are for the Muslims. And I think, wallahu a'lam, that was clearly shown in the discussion. And I don't know really what else I would say in regards to the issue other than I think that, mashallah, Shaykh Asrar brought up a good point. He said that the tradition of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah is very vast and is very wide. And there is no need for us as Muslims to go outside of the very wide da'ira that is Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. We have the four madhabs of fiqh, and we have the schools of Aqidah, the Maturidis, the Ash'aris, and the true followers of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. There is no need for us to create some new methodology or to have some new reformist movement. There's all of this variation within the acceptable tradition of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah that there's enough information for it to be applied to the modern world and to aid Muslims in the modern world. But again, I think that Yasser's problem is that because he never learned and was never trained in that expansive tradition, and he was pigeonholed into this one way of thinking, now that one way of thinking has been destroyed, it has caused him to have a crisis. I don't want to say a crisis of faith, but a crisis of understanding his faith, a crisis of understanding his methodology. Whereas if he would only come to what is the expansive and, wide tradition of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, all of the issues that he sees in the modern world regards to doubts and what Muslims need, these things would all be answered. And alhamdulillah, I think that's very clear. Wallahu a'lam. And I think alhamdulillah that Sheikh Asrar, he mentioned a point. He said that just in regards to practical unity between the Muslims, he said, okay, we take something as simple as Bayan al-Sunnati wal-Jama'ah, the Aqidah al-Tahawiyya of Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah. Let this be a base that all of us can agree upon. Stick to the Aqidah al-Tahawiyya. Teach this. Teach what we all agree is the agreed upon methodology of the Salaf al-Salih. And if we go through the Aqidah al-Tahawiyya or any other agreed upon Aqidah text that we have, step by step, let's see where we agree and where we differ. And if we differ on any point of the Aqidah al-Tahawiyya or any agreed upon Aqidah text that we would decide between us and the brothers from the other side, okay, why do we disagree on this set point of the Aqidah al-Tahawiyya or any other agreed upon Aqidah text that we take? Whose understanding, ours or yours, is closer to the original intent of the author and the original wording of the author? Would we have these disagreements and would you have this understanding were it not for the works of a later scholar like Ahmed ibn Taymiyyah or his student Ibn al-Qayyim or all of the modern scholars of the Salafi/Wahhabi movement? If we can prove that that's the case, name your men to us. Show us where these differences of understanding and where these differences, where do they exist outside of you relying on these scholars of these modern movements. And if we can prove that these ideas come from these scholars, that come from these modern reformist movements, then we have proven to them that your aqidah is not the aqidah of the Salaf, that your aqidah is not the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the things that we disagree upon with each other are based on your refusal to abandon these few men who had ideas that were outside of the ijma' of the Muslims. And, you know, I think it's as simple as that. Wallahu a'lam. I kind of feel like I'm rambling right now. So I'll pass the mic to Imam Amin, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
And one of the things that I think, may Allah reward both you, Imam Faheem and Imam Muawiyah. I don't call Muawiyah just my brother, because I honestly see so much potential in him if we have courage. I don't look at him, I look at us. If we have courage to encourage our youth to work hard, to build, I think they will be better than us. But we got to give them the start. We got to open the door while as elders watching, but give them the chance to grow and put them right in the fire. But always have the water right behind them so they don't get burned. But put them in the fire. Let them do it. And we'll see great results if the right mentorship is there and they're able to use their own vision, their own understanding, while learning the tradition at the same time. I think it will work. So, you know, may Allah reward you and increase you. And I encourage you to keep going. Don't stop, right? And, you know, don't be shy to do the work that's needed to be done, because truly not many people are doing that work. So may Allah reward you.
Yeah, just keep coming up to Camden too, you know. Alhamdulillah, as much as you can.
So I have a lot of things to do, so I'm going to wait till everyone get theirs out, and then I got a ton load of questions coming. So be prepared for that. Inshallah, I'll give it to Sheikh Yahya. Barakallahu bikum.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I'm not going to be very long because I only have a couple things to say. As Imam Amin mentioned, I didn't even see the video. Okay, I saw only the first 25 minutes of the video because I started watching it right before we started here. If I had known Imam Faheem and Imam Muawiyah would have taken so long, I could have finished the video while they were talking, inshallah. Y'all know I'm just messing with you. It's all love. But
all love, Sheikh. All love, Sheikh.
It's all love, ya Ahl Sunnah. Trust me, there's no title higher to me in my heart than the title of Sunni. You know, if you're a sheikh or if you're not a sheikh, if you're a mujtahid or if you're a muqallid, if your aqidah is sound and you're obedient to your creator, then this is the job. This is the task. You're one of the winners, inshallah ta'ala, if you die on that state. You know, and that's all we're really trying to do, is be winners on the day of judgment. The titles we have in the dunya, ultimately, we don't take them with us. But I did want to say something going back to the topic of this video. And that is the word modern kept being thrown around. And no one ever defined what the word modern means. And I found that odd because someone like Dr. Yasser Qadi, who was educated at Yale, certainly knows what the word modern means. But he's not defining it because I think he's trying to cloud boundaries and confuse things. Okay, in the Western, academic discourse, the modern period began roughly around the year 1500. Okay, some 500 years ago, is where the modern period began. And what the Western academics mean when they say modernity, or at least one of the things they mean, is a kind of slow dissemination of power and authority. That before 1500, especially if you look at Europe, secular power was centralized in one person. That would be the king. And religious power in Europe, at least, was centralized into one person, which was the Pope. And modernity was a challenge to centralized authority in an attempt to disseminate that authority to more and more people. So you had people developing, first thing that they did was they developed Protestantism. They came up with new ways of teaching Christianity that didn't all go through one person. You know, they disseminated the authority such that someone like Martin Luther, who was not the Pope, but nonetheless had a lot of training, could be looked at as an authority. And someone like John Calvin, who also had a lot of education and training, could be looked at as an authority, despite the fact that they're not the Pope, nor authorized by the Pope, nor speaking for the Pope. Decentralizing religious authority. And on the secular side, they came up with democracy and all these other things to disseminate secular authority. That's what modernism is. It's a rebellion against authority and an insistence that the common man is able to do whatever the authorities previously were the ones, like the things that used to be reserved only to the authority. It's an insistence that the common person can do those things. This is what modernity is. And it went all the way to its logical, ending point, which is believing that authority is vested individually into each person. And now we're in an age where, the scholars now are calling our times postmodern. Right? They say we're out of the modern age, and now we're in the postmodern age, which is, an age of relativism, where one person A, can say, because he believes authority is vested in him, he reaches his conclusion. And person B believes authority is vested in him, he reaches his conclusion. And even if these conclusions are completely diametrically opposed, postmodernism says, well, this guy, that's his truth, and this guy, that's his truth, and they don't have to agree. That nobody can say someone else is wrong. That's postmodernism. And if the goal of Dr. Yasser Qadhi is to defend Islam from modernism, the number one thing he needs to defend Islam against is the idea that the common untrained person can do the things that previously had been reserved only to those of authority. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam clearly said that there's a class of people known as mujtahids. It's their job to interpret the deen. They're rewarded whether they interpreted it correctly or not. And there's another class of people who are not those authorities. And if they make errors, they're going to bear the burden of those errors on the day of judgment. This is very clear. We as Muslims cannot deny that there's a class of people who have authority to interpret the deen and a class that doesn't. Yasser Qadhi, what he doesn't understand is that he's contradicting himself. In his attempt to confront modernism, he has a blind spot where he doesn't see his whole perspective, his whole approach is extremely modern. He is the modernism that we need to defend Islam against. This notion that he, without being a mujtahid, can derive the understanding that's correct. This notion that he can reject following any madhab. Okay, that's the modernism that is the biggest threat to us right now. And that idea, it has many faces to it. Some people take that idea and they approach it from a very ultra liberal, radical liberal perspective. And, nowadays we call these people modernists. These people that say the deen needs to be updated. People who say polygamy should be forbidden because although it was okay in the past, that times have changed. These people that say times have changed, so they say the rules need to be updated. These people are falling. Their minds are drenched in modernism, but they're also very liberal, and so they're trying to reform the deen from the left. And you have people whose minds are drenched in modernism, and they try to reform the deen from the right. This would be like the Wahhabis. They want to take the deen that has been passed down to us in unchanged fashion through chains of transmission from the time of the Salaf to the present. They want to take that beautiful deen, and the people from the right, they want to restrict it. They want to narrow it. They want things that are acceptable in the deen, like good bid'ahs, to be forbidden. They want things that are acceptable in the deen, like interpreting things in non-literal ways, to be forbidden. They want to force you into literal interpretations, force you into, in their minds, practicing exactly the way the people in the first 300 years did, without any changes of any kind. Even though, they don't even really know the truth, the reality of how the people of the first 300 years practice, but they imagine something and they're trying to make their imagination reality. Both of these people, they're coming from different directions, but their aim is the same. It's to reform. They want to reform the pure Islam and make it into something that's acceptable to modern people, whether those modern people are liberal or whether those modern people are ultra-conservative. More than the other things, that is the threat. The first thing we need to do is we need to educate our people on the fundamentalness of taqleed. Okay? Like, we should not be telling people, I follow Quran and Sunnah. We should be telling people, I follow Quran and Sunnah as it's been explained by the scholars. You know what I mean? It needs to be right there with it, like mentioned, as important, as fundamental as the textual sources is the idea that if you're not a mujtahid, you have to follow one. That's for Aqidah and for fiqh. So that's, I guess, the first point I wanted to make, and I'm being more verbose than I intended on, so I apologize for that. But the second point that I wanted to make is similar to it. And that is that when I observe this conversation, and I don't put it all on the shoulders of Dr. Yasser Qadhi, I put some of it even on Dr. Shadi and the way he was presenting things. But the very paradigm and terms that they're using are brand new terms. It's almost like the traditional way of approaching the deen somehow needs to change. I don't recall at any point in my studies coming across a subject called applied aqidah. I know there's fiqh and there's usul al-fiqh. I didn't know there was aqidah and applied aqidah. Like, what is this science they're referring to? Traditionally, it doesn't exist. And when I hear what they're describing of what we need to do for this applied aqidah, most of it sounds like tasawwuf, which is a traditional thing that Muslims have been practicing and teaching for all these centuries. So why wouldn't they just call it that? Another part of it, of this so-called applied aqidah, sounds like it's just regular old ilmul kalam. When you study ilmul kalam, you not only study what we believe as Sunnis and study the dalils that support what we believe, you also study the errors of the deviant groups. And we learn how to refute them. And guess what? Most of the deviant things we encounter in our days have been refuted in those books, just like Sheikh Asrar mentioned. Okay? There's no need to come up with a whole new science called applied aqidah. I really feel like this is like, I don't know, what do the kids call it these days? Gaslighting or cap, whatever they say nowadays. But he's trying to delegitimize the history of scholarship that this ummah produced. If he would have just said we need to study Aqidah, the Muslims would have said, yes, let's go back to the books of Aqidah. We have this great tradition. But instead he says we need something new. It has to be applied Aqidah. Oh, there's no books on that. So let us not look in the books of our forebears, and instead let us, we the unqualified ones, come up with something new. It's like a double whammy. He's not only validating that this notion that the muqallid is actually a mujtahid, but he's also obfuscating for us where we should seek our answers. It's extremely dangerous. I don't think the shaitan himself could have done a better job. It's extremely dangerous. So let's not get confused by all these funny new terms he's putting out and describing things in new paradigms in order to get you to shift how you're looking at the matter. In the end, it's very simple. How did the Muslims traditionally teach and practice? Thinking of it any other way implies that the Muslims of the past did not understand their deen. Or it implies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not reveal to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam what is sufficient for us even in our times. It's the implications are equally disturbing. No. Okay, I'll stop there, but I think you get my point.
Alhamdulillah. So I want to, and as I go back to what I started beginning, because I have many questions. Myself, I have a lot of things, but I think every day everyone hears me. They know my feeling. They know my position. I'm like very explicit. I don't beat around the bush. I don't sugarcoat my words. I don't do any of that. So I think my position is known. So I'm just repeating what everyone who knows me knows about me, right? I don't consider Ahl Sunnah as someone who is outside of the vast majority of the Muslim nation. And the vast majority of the Muslim nation has been described by our illustrious scholars of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah simple. In Aqidah, humul Asha'ira wal Maturidiyya. And anyone who agrees with them in creed, even if they don't use the name. But for the name purpose, al-Asha'ira wal-Maturidiyya. In al-Fiqh, they are al-Hanafiyya, al-Malikiyya, al-Shafi'iyya, wal-Hanabila. And they are Ahl al-Tasawwuf. That's the strictest, clearest, unambiguous definition of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. I did not hear that. So that means there was some added ideas. And I want to preface what I'm going to say. So that's my position. That's Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, according to how I've learned, with an unbroken chain back to those great Imams from the leading scholars of this nation in their books. As an example, our teachers in Sham, in Damascus, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, from generation to generation, every one of them have said this. This is what we understood. From the vast majority of the illuminated, illustrious, qualified scholars of this nation, that was their position, hands down. And anyone who deviated from that were rare individuals that you can count on your hand. And what I've seen in the modern and even postmodern thought pattern of some people is that they hijacked the term Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah and gave it a definition that wasn't understood in our unbroken chains of narration. And it reminds me of the statement of Abdullah ibn Mubarak that is mentioned by Imam Muslim in the introduction of his Sahih. When he talks about how we learned this religion, he said that the chain, al-isnadu min ad-din, that the chain of narration is a part of the religion. And if it is not for the isnad, then anyone can say whatever they want. And what we're seeing, there is no asanid for these statements. There is no connected chain. So people are doing exactly that, saying whatever they want. And as Muhammad ibn Sirin mentioned in the same book that Imam Muslim narrated with his chains of narration from Sayyidina Imam Muhammad ibn Sirin, He said, Inna hadha al-ilm deen, fanduru amman ta'khuduna deenakum. Verily, this knowledge you're learning is the religion, so look well from whom you taking your religion. It's like we throwing out global and historical Islamic understanding of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah that is from generation, tabaqa and tabaqa, all the way from the Prophet ﷺ down to our day. And the great Imams who established these sciences and formulated them and codified them and systematized them, we've neglected all that for an understanding that, according to them, was a rejected understanding. And if I go back to what the Prophet ﷺ said, as Imam Ibn Majah and others related about him, from the Prophet ﷺ, that he said, Inna Allah la yajma'u ummati ala dalala, فإذا رأيتم اختلافا فعليكم بالسواد الأعظم. That Allah would never allow my nation, the nation of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to agree on misguidance. فَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمْ اخْتِلَافًا, so whenever you see differences, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسَّوَادِ الْأَعْظَمِ, then you follow the vast majority of the nation. Sawad al-A'zam, Jamhur al-Ummah, or in another term, al-Jama'ah, right? This is known among our scholars. But now what we've selectively done in our modern and postmodern endeavor to reform Islam, to bring an Islam that ultimately, if we keep it up, won't be Islam at all. It'll be Islam in name and no meaning. And this is what I see happening. And I see Sunnis, unfortunately, not clear in this issue for political correctness, or, we want unity, but when unity, we're losing clarity. And I don't think that's the objective of unity, to use clarity. I don't even think that's the objection of cooperation, to lose clarity. So it is, I'll give you an example. And I can be long-winded, so I'm going to slow down, but this is very important. It is amazing that those people who have those ideas that contradict that. So they say we don't follow Ash'aris or Maturidis or Madhahib or Sufis. And notice that all of them are in the aim of that attack. Not just Ash'aris and Maturidis and Creed, but following al-Madhahib. Even if they say they follow al-Madhahib, we follow the schools, they alter the school. Anyone who says, they say, for instance, if I have the creed of so-called Salafiyya or Wahhabiyya, if a person has that creed, move to fiqh. So they already, I'm not Ash'ari, I'm not Maturidi. Move to fiqh. If they follow, and that's an if, because not all of them still follow a madhab. They have this false illusion of I follow Quran and Sunnah, and they don't know anything about Quran and Sunnah when they're examined. When they're tested in their knowledge of the Sunnah, they are so far from the Sunnah you wouldn't believe it. When they're tested in their knowledge of the Sunnah. But let's put that to the side. So that I follow Quran and Sunnah is a direct attack to following al-madhahib, following madhabs. When they say, I do follow a madhab, mathalan, they'll never be Hanafi because Abu Hanifa was a deviant. So you don't find Hanafi Salafi or a Hanafi Wahhabi. That's almost impossible. The hatred towards Imam Abu Hanifa. And if you notice historically, Imam Abu Hanifa didn't write in fiqh, he wrote in Aqidah. That's something I want you to think about. The books of Imam Abu Hanifa are not books of fiqh, they're books of Aqidah. And you notice they don't study the books of Imam Abu Hanifa, which are the books of Aqidah, which Al-Sunnah, Al-Asha'ira, Wal-Maturidiyya, they study the books of Imam Abu Hanifa. Just pay attention to this. So when it comes to a madhab, so they'll say, I'm Shafi'i, or I'm Maliki, or I'm Hanbali, even the Hanbali school, and then study their opinions within the school. You see that they contradict the mu'tamad, the relied upon books in the madhab, altering the masail, altering the ahkam, altering the shurut, altering the arkan, even the mubtilat that are relied upon in the school itself. You will find it without no exception. If you pay attention, go listen to their classes of their scholars. Forget the laymen, because the laymen are following their scholars. Go listen to the scholars in their classes on any book in fiqh and see how much they deviate from the madhab when you study with a traditional person who learned the madhab with an unbroken chain back to the scholars of those books, and see how they alter the madhab. So that's in fiqh. And then you already know their enmity towards tasawwuf, Sufism. So everything that classically has been represented as Ahl Sunnah around the world, global and historical, they oppose. And then they'll say, we're Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So that the unsuspecting person, they just hear Ahl Sunnah or they hear Sunni, and they're not aware of all these deviations and contradictions that exist. And so now that's what is known among Al-Wahhabiyya or Salafiyya in this case. Now there's developments within that where the person is no longer on the manhaj, yet we're not addressed. So I'm not Salafi, I'm not Wahhabi in name, but in meaning, I carry the same creed, the same idea, and the same practice. And when I'm talking to the Sunni, that will go right by without being addressed. For me, that's quite problematic. And that's what I saw when I said I was kind of disappointed, because even though you're Sunni, you're watching someone alter, confuse the masses of people in the name of Ahl Sunnah, and you have the opportunity to clarify and you leave it a void. For me, I think that's problematic. I mean, that's from my side. And I'll stop there. I have some questions. One question, since I'll stop. Could each of you, if you agree with me, you agree. If you disagree, could you define Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah and what is included and what is excluded from Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah? So I would like that question answered from all three. If you agree with my definition, I gave it, I was clear, you agree. If you disagree, could you give me your definition? And from where did that definition come from? And the exclusions would put someone outside of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Barakallahu bikum.
Well, I guess I'll go first. I actually disagree with you slightly. I think your description is a good description of the norm within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, but I don't think, I would disagree that that's the minimum definition. Like, I disagree that that's what defines Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, such that if a person doesn't meet your description, he's outside of it. So, for example, I believe what defines Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are a set of beliefs. If you have those beliefs, then you are Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Those beliefs can be found in the Ash'ari and Maturidi schools. And like you said, if someone is not specifically learning either of those schools, but his belief does not disagree with those schools, then yes, that person is also Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah because he has the beliefs in his heart. Okay, we're not talking about titles and names. We're talking about what do you believe? And that's basically my point. Like, to me, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or my understanding, is that Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is defined by one's beliefs. So if a person didn't follow a madhab in fiqh, in fact, if he never prayed at all, okay, if he were just like the most sinful Muslim you can imagine, if his belief is correct, then he's still Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. If the person did not practice tasawwuf, but his belief was in agreement with the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, I would say he's still Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. To me, the definition of the group Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is based entirely on Aqidah, even if the norm within that group is to also follow one of the four madhabs in fiqh and to also follow tasawwuf to some extent. I don't think those two things are essential to defining who's in and who's out of the club.
I have a question just for clarification. So according to that definition, if a person followed the belief of the Ash'aris and Maturidis, but his fiqh was the fiqh of the Zahiriyya or the Ja'fariyya, would he be still considered Ahl Sunnah?
I would say yes. Now, we might say that his fiqh practice is incorrect, but we wouldn't say he's out of Ahl Sunnah for it.
So
keep in mind, when we say someone is out of Ahl Sunnah, that's basically like shorthand for saying he's a kafir. You know?
No, I disagree with that. Totally. We're discussing, so don't let me follow discussion.
Go ahead.
We got a topic for next week now.
Yes. I mean, because we got to have this discussion. And this is the point. And I think Muawiyah is loving this because we have this discussion all the time. You don't have to be a kafir because you're not Ahl Sunnah. Give you an example.
Okay.
So you can have a belief that is a belief of bid'ah, innovation, violent innovation, but it didn't reach the level of kufr, disbelief. So you still are a Muslim, but you're outside of the realm of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. You are from Ahl al-Bid'ah wal Furqa. But you're still a Muslim. So when I'm making that definition, every contradiction of the creed of Ahl Sunnah is not kufr. Sometimes it's just bid'ah. And
I said it's like shorthand for kufr. But yes, there are cases where a person might be a deviant, but it's below the level of kufr and the person is still a Muslim.
Right.
Yes, it's possible.
And sometimes that deviance could outwardly represent kufr, but because of a shubha, some kind of problematic understanding, the judgment of kufr won't be put on that person, but the judgment of bid'ah will be.
Yes.
So Ahl Sunnah not necessarily is going to be in creed, because if you contradict ijma and fiqh, and some of those Ja'fariyya and Zahiriyya and Wahhabiyya, they contradict the consensus of the ummah in fiqh. And that contradiction of the ijma is outside of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, but you're still a Muslim, depending the issue. We're talking about fiqh, not creed. So for instance, Ibn Taymiyyah, right, had the false understanding that divorce at 3 times in one is only one divorce against the ijma of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And in this case, he's outside of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, but that doesn't make him kafir. In that issue, I'm talking about in that issue.
So I don't want to rule on Ibn Taymiyyah personally because I don't know what he knew or didn't know.
No, I'm just talking about that particular issue. That issue is an ijtihadi issue, which is wrong, contradicts Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, outside of all 4 madhahib, and it is outside of the position of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And in that case, that's a case of bid'ah that you're not going to judge someone as a kafir for it.
Like I said, I'm not
outside of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah.
I'm not going to speak on that particular case.
No, I'm not talking about other cases. We can have that.
The general rule.
I'm just giving my examples of the cases where being outside of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah doesn't always make you a kafir.
Well, all right. Well, I'll put it this way. The case you mentioned could make you a kafir, or it could not make you a kafir.
Exactly.
It depends on certain details about what Ibn Taymiyyah knew. And because I don't have those details, I'm not in a position where I can judge him. But depending on what he knew, he could become a kafir for that judgment.
But let's make it more practical. The ulama of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, those who did judge him as kafir, in their books, they didn't judge him kafir for that. They judged him kafir for other reasons.
Not plenty of other reasons, other things.
No, so I'm talking about that case. An example, who was the Qadi Qudat in his time and lived during the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, was the great Imam Shaykh al-Islam, the real Shaykh al-Islam, Taqiyuddin al-Subki. He didn't judge for contradicting ijma in the issue of at-talaq. He didn't judge Ibn Taymiyyah as a kafir for that. And it's not mentioned in none of his books for that issue for him to be kafir. I'm just making the point that, but still, that's outside of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And even the latter Wahhabi Hanbali scholars, they changed that position that people were following of Ibn Taymiyyah because it contradicted the madhab of Imam Ahmad. So, and even them, they didn't consider him a kafir for that, right? I'm just giving the example of, that's only for the purpose of saying that to be outside of Ahl Sunnah doesn't have to be in areas of creed.
Okay, well,
That's all my point.
To that I would respond the rule, la yunsabu ila sakati qawl.
Right.
Okay, so just because Imam al-Subki didn't say, I judge him kafir for that, you cannot then say that he did not, you don't know what his opinion was on the subject.
Well, he didn't document it, and nor did none of the judges who imprisoned Ibn Taymiyyah. And that was by the agreement of the four madhahib.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't imprison him for that issue. They didn't judge him for that. And the documents are well known. So if we say, okay, he was wrong in that issue, no doubt about that. But that wasn't the issue that they took to the level to imprison him. It was other issues, and they documented those issues. So I'm just going based on what is documented in the books of that. That's all I'm talking about.
But the thing is, I can't agree, because the rulings of judges apply to the specific cases that they're applied to. You cannot extract a general rule from a specific ruling of a specific case. This is what Imam Shafi'i and others said about qadiyatul hal.
I understand that, but that's,
I mean, you're trying to pull out one example and then make it into some kind of rule. And that's why I'm saying I don't want to talk about that one example, because it's too specific. Okay, we can't generalize based off of one thing when we don't even know all the details of what happened in the courtroom.
But here's what we do.
We must agree to disagree and move on.
Follow me. Here's my point. The point we're making is, and I just want that to be clear, and tell me, do you agree with that or not? That to have an issue that is innovation that's outside of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah doesn't always reach the level of kufr. We agree with that, right?
We agree on that. Yes.
That was the point. Okay. Go ahead. So that was his definition.
So to summarize my definition, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is defined by aqidah. This is my stance. And that if a person did some bid'ah that made him misguided, I don't say that it would. It's possible that a person is a fasiq. Okay, a fasiq, meaning like one of the Ahlul Bid'ah who's not a kafir. But I've never heard from any of my teachers that that person is somehow out of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Like the understanding that I have is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is the saved sect. Well, no, that's not actually. Actually, this is a surprisingly tough question, mashallah.
It's not. We share the same teachers, and that's the position of our teachers.
We have some of the same teachers, that's true, but
and I know those teachers very well, and that's their position. That I took word for word, bit talaqi. Now, I'm not saying the exact same teacher in every case, but that's the general position that I've learned since I was a kid. The same teachers.
Well, it's not the way I heard it.
Okay, barakallahu bikum. Go ahead, continue. So, I mean, we just wanted the point, though. We did establish that, Imam Faheem.
Yeah, actually, this is one of the questions that Dr. Shadi mentioned at the end of the talk with Dr. Yasser and Sheikh Asrar. He asked, he was implying that he suggested, is our unity based on basic unity or how do we define Ahl Sunnah? So part of the discussion was Dr. Yasser was basically saying, like, you know, if a person has basic faith, you know, they utter the Shahada, they pray and all of these kind of things, then you consider them Muslims. And it's probably, you know, circling around some of the discussion you just had just now. But then it gets more refined the more you go deeper, you know, what does a person actually believe? And so when they asked Dr. Yasser, this is where he started dancing a lot at the end. So he said that this whole issue of unity upon, you know, the right Aqidah, he said that it's not a black and white and binary issue about unity. He said that he had a term, you know, because he has these new terms. He came up with a term called circles of cooperation. He had coined a term that he coined circles of cooperation, meaning that in specific circles that we all cooperate on what we agree on, and then we reserve the right to what we don't agree on. We still take our stance, but we have the right to keep that stance while we have some type of unity, you know. So in other words, he's going to keep his stance on what he believes, and you have the right to, you know, what you believe, and that shouldn't hinder us from unity, right? Then when they asked Sheikh Asrar about the same thing, he said that when we talk about the term Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, then it has already been well defined, you know, and what opposes it. And then he said, and because when you talk about it, like Salafis and Wahhabis, they all claim it. You know, he said, but what we have to do is we're going to have this discussion about having common unity or coming to common ground. He said the common ground is found in sticking to the two schools and the form of that. He said, so what the people who claim to follow Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what they have to do is go, you know, point by point and really see where they have strayed from that, you know. And then he gave examples about, and when he talked about Salafis, he was talking about those followers of, you know, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and then, you know, Al-Albani, bin Baz, Uthaymeen, and all of those kind of people who, you know, have even said, and, you know, on their sites and stuff, they delete stuff that they said, that they have said that these scholars to them were mujtahid mutlaq. They have said this before. I remember reading this because I used to read all of their stuff back in the day when I was a card-carrying member of the Wahhabi movement. And I remember reading that. So he was saying, no, what we have to do is go look. And Imam Amin, you alluded to this earlier, that even some of those people, like, you know, for instance, when they talk about, and Sheikh Asrar was saying, like, you know, if we want to find what the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is, we look at the creed of Imam al-Tahawi, you know, and that really defines it. And he said, you know, in there's some things that it is not permissible for you to reject, you know, because then this would be kufr, you know. And then there's some things where he mentioned that that Imam Tahawi mentions about, you know, Aqidah, like I think he said Raf or Yadain. I think he mentioned that in the book, right? He said this is not an issue. He don't mention that, right? He mentioned something else. I forget the topic.
He was talking about directions. Directions.
No, he said, yeah, this is what he said. He said about the directions that they vehemently denied, you know, that Allah, you know, or Imam Tahawi said that Allah is not contained by the 6 directions. They oppose that, you know, so this is problematic with Aqidah. But then some of the secondary issues that Imam Tahawi mentions, that it's not necessarily blameworthy if someone kind of rejects that. But these main issues is where these Salafis, Wahhabis have shown to be in total opposition, you know, and even where they're tampering with works, giving their own, you know, explanations. As for, he mentioned, like, for instance, when you read the creed of Imam Tahawi, you know, the Wahhabis will always refer to Ibn Abul Izz al-Hanafi's work and, like, disregard the other ones and what they're saying, the classical ones. And some of the things that they will mention in their explanations of Tahawi, you know, saying that Imam Tahawi was incorrect in this view, and, you know, they're not nowhere on the level of Imam Tahawi, you know. And so he said that if we want to find common ground, And if Salafis claim Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, like Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah claims, then there is a methodology. You know, there's the Quran, then there's the Sunnah, then there's Ijma, then there's Qiyas. You know, and then you have to go through all of these processes and understand them and know what has been passed down for generations, instead of just, you know, saying, okay, I could take this, I could take that. This is no longer applicable. This is old. You know, this is a historical reference. We got to reevaluate some of these things. No, so that's what he was saying. So when the term Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is very clear, then it's for people. If we want to have some unity, he basically saying, like, y'all got to come over to what Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is. You need to claim a school, Ashari or Maturidi. You need to follow one of the 4 schools of fiqh, and you need to call tasawwuf what it is, instead of making these talks and talking about its purification of the soul. You know, he's talking about spiritual refinement and all of this refinement of the soul. It's tasawwuf that's already been spoken about for thousands of years, you know, and because you have a problem with the term, then going back to some of the scholars that they have, they're saying that tasawwuf has no basis in Islam. So all of these scholars who have made a basis of tasawwuf with proofs, you know, with applied application, and now you have these latter-day scholars that they rely on saying that tasawwuf has no basis and try to prove it. You know, so so that was my take on it. Once we know the term Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, you know, in some instances it's broad, but then it has to be restricted for clarity. You know, and what's the Dr. Yasser said something. He said that the bigger the community that you have, the lower the bar has to be for unity. You remember when he said that? He said the bigger community that you have. So in other words, he's willing to compromise all types of beliefs and accommodate all types of things just for the sake of unity. And that's not our approach. You know, we're not going to have unity because, you know, you accept this person, you accept that, and they sound good. And he even talked about some people he will have on his, you know, coming to his masjid and on his minbar and teaching, you know, and that he doesn't necessarily agree with them. But then he had another concept about toleration but not acceptance. You know, then he mentioned some story about, you know, if you had a Shiite neighbor or something, yeah, I'm not going to take beliefs from him, but I'm not going to, if we have a national, neighborhood watch, you know, I'm not going to not invite him over my house and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, just all over the place, you know, but really not really pinpointing what the definition of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is, you know, and that is the problem, because when you don't do that and you don't restrict it to what it's been all of these years, then you open up all of these doors, and then that's where people start to, you know, go to the left. So, and that was my take on it. Also, real quick, where we at?
We halfway. There's going to be a little overtime because we have a lot to cover.
No, it ain't. I'm tired, bro. Go ahead.
Here's the thing. What I don't want to leave with, and this is from my side, I don't want to leave without clarity, right? Like, and whatever it takes to get that clarity, I want to get that clarity. So if, in summary, could you give me your definition of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, just in summary? You mentioned it, just summarize it real quick.
You talking to me?
Yeah.
Asharis, Maturidis, and the 4 Madhahib.
Okay. Imam Wawi, are you up next? Sorry, my name ain't Dr. Shadi. No running, right? No running.
No, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I would say that in general, I agree with what Imam Amin, Imam Faheem, and Sheikh Yahya also mentioned, that Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is the followers of the 4 madhahib in fiqh, in either the Ash'aris or Maturidis and Aqidah. I think the only caveat I would add is maybe that, and also those that agree with them, obviously, because there were scholars, like, for example, many of the scholars of the Hanabila, they did not call themselves Ash'ari. They did not, you know, consider themselves Ash'a'ira necessarily, because they disagreed with the Ash'a'ira in some far'i matters of Aqidah, some branch matters of Aqidah. But in general, the usul of Aqidah is one. So whoever agrees with the Ash'aris, the Maturidis, and the Imams of the relied upon Imams of the Hanabila in Aqidah, like for example Ibn Qudama rahimahullah, then they are Sunni. This is Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. But I actually have a question about the discussion between you and Sheikh Yahya, actually, if I'm able to ask. So it's for you, Imam Amin. Are you saying that a person would be removed from Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah simply, for example, in a fiqhi mas'ala? Let's take a fiqhi mas'ala. They go against ijma' in this mas'ala, against the ijma' of Ahl Sunnah in this issue. Would this render the person not a Sunni? They are no longer Sunni, or they are not Sunni in this mas'ala. Like you'll say that this person is not upon the methodology of Ahl Sunnah. This person is not following the position of the ulama of Ahl Sunnah in this issue. But in general, this person holds the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They hold to the practice of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But in a mas'ala, they go against ijma' mathalan. Would you say that this person isn't a Sunni anymore, or they have bid'ah in that specific mas'ala?
I would say it as Imam al-Haddad radiallahu ta'ala was asked a similar question. He said, he was asked, is the truth confined in the Ash'ari madhab? That was asked to Imam al-Haddad radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And his response was, in the Ash'ari madhab is the truth. That which contradicts it in others is some in the truth and some in falsehood, right? And that's why he mentioned in his diwan, kun ashariyan. When he described in his book, Risalatul Mu'awwana, who are al-Sunnah, he said al-Asha'ira, and then he said, and in all we mentioned, after mentioning his family, he said the Maturidis are the same. He didn't mention no one else. When the great Hafiz, Muhammad Murtada al-Zabidi, in his book, Ithaf al-Sadat al-Muttaqeen, Bisharh Ihya Ulumuddin, when he was explaining the Qawaid of al-Aqidah, he said, whenever Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah is mentioned, hum al-Asha'ira wal Maturidiyya. They are the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. The great Muhaddith of Mecca, Muhammad ibn al-Lan al-Bakri al-Siddiqi, the author of the commentary on Al-Adhkar and on Riyadh al-Salihin, when he described Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah, he said they are the Asha'ira and Maturidiyya. And what is always known is in those who agree with them. So my answer to your question is, when a person contradicts ijma', he's outside of the fold of Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah, though he may agree with Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah in many matters. But by contradicting the consensus, that contradiction takes him out of Ahl-Sunnah, right? That issue. So I'll give you an example. When we look at those people like Shawkani, for instance, if you study his books, he has some of the beliefs in Aqidah of the Asha'ira. He doesn't have the belief of Wahhabis. Study his books, his tafsir. He doesn't have the belief of the Wahhabis. But he contradicts Ahl-Sunnah in many issues of fiqh. And that's why he's not counted among Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Even though in creed, especially with a ta'wil and tafweed, he has the same belief. Read his books. But in the issues, other issues, and some issues in creed, he contradicts Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So even though he agrees with them in some issues, he's not counted among Ahl-Sunnah, and Allah knows best. This is what I learned from my teachers.
No, I would just say that I think the difference I'm asking is that, like, take Shawkani, for example. Shawkani was raised and trained as a Zaydi. He was trained as a Shi'i scholar, which means he didn't come from the methodology of Ahl Sunnah to begin with. I'm saying in the example, we have a Sunni scholar. He's known to be Sunni. He follows one of the four schools. He's Sunni in Aqidah, for example. But in a specific mas'ala, even if it's just one mas'ala, he contradicts the not even in Aqidah, in fiqh. He contradicts Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in a mas'ala of fiqh. But other than that, he's upon the way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. If you ask him, my fiqh is the fiqh of one of the four madhabs.
No doubt. You're right.
Right. But is this person a Sunni or are they not?
He's a Sunni in the issues he agree with Sunni, and he's outside of Ahl Sunnah in the issues where he contradict al-ijma.
Right, but in general, the man would be described as
In
a
general,
Sunni.
he will be described as a Sunni.
But he has a mistake in this issue.
He's outside of Ahl Sunnah in those issues.
Right.
Not
in
just a mistake.
Right.
He's outside of the madhab of Ahl Sunnah.
In that issue.
In that issue. And because of that issue, we're not going to look at him as someone who's adhering to the methodology of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah in totality. Because in that issue, if he sticks to that issue, he's contradicting Ahl Sunnah. He's from Ahl Bidah. Give you an example. And this is the problem that I'm having with this whole issue for me, right? The Wahhabiyya, or those who call themselves Salafiyya, there's a game being played. I'm not Wahhabi, I'm Salafi, right? But do the Wahhabi, followers of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and the so-called Salafis, let them be followers of Ibn Taymiyyah if they want, Taymiyyun, call them whatever you want to call them. Do they have the same creed in issues of Sifatullah that contradict consensus? Yes or no?
Yes.
For instance, they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in a location, whether they're Wahhabi, Salafi, or Taymi, right or wrong.
Yes.
That is not Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah.
Right.
So we don't count them as Ahl Sunnah,
right.
even though they say they're Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah.
Right, but that's not the question.
I'm just giving an example of what I'm talking about.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I think the only thing is that's not the question I'm asking. Like, take a Salafi. A Salafi, they oppose us in Aqidah, in Usul. Like, from the Usul down, their Usul is completely different from ours. Their way of viewing Aqidah is completely different from ours. I'm talking about a scholar. Is somebody to be considered a Mubtadi' outside of Ahl Sunnah, just by contradicting Ahl Sunnah in a single mas'ala, even if it's a mas'ala fiqhiyah?
Of ijma, yes.
Okay.
If it's a mas'ala of khilaf, no.
Okay.
If it's a mas'ala of ijma, you cannot count this person as a Sunni in totality. You can say he's Sunni in those issues, he agree with Ahl Sunnah. But when he contradicts consensus, he's not Sunni, and you cannot attribute him as a Sunni just because of that issue, because that issue contradicts all of Ahl Sunnah. In other words, if you counted it as it's permissible, then someone, here's the danger, someone would think, especially if you just said he's Sunni and not mention the fact that he contradicts al-ijma', right? Then people would follow him in that. That's the danger. Do you follow my point? Right. Hence, while people let Dr. Yasser Qadhi play those games, common people will follow him in what is right and what is wrong, because you didn't clarify it, right? So now that issue has to be clarified, and you can't play politics with that, right? You may play politics in issues that are not contradicting the methodology of Ahl Sunnah, but when it's contradicting Ahl Sunnah, you cannot play politics with that. You have to be clear. And for us in postmodern and modern, clarity is dogmatic. If you're clear, you're dogmatic, and that's problematic.
So
if you understand
something here, because after hearing this, I think you and I didn't actually agree. Imam, didn't actually disagree. I think we had a disagreement in terminology. So, like, the wording that I was taught was that if a person goes against the ijma in a fiqh issue, and he knows that it's ijma, this person exits Islam. This person becomes a kafir, because he's saying that Islam itself is false. Okay, when he knows that the Islamic teaching is A, and then he says, no, A is wrong, B is what's right, then he's saying Islam itself is wrong. And in cases of ijma, it means Islam has only that one teaching. You know, so you can't reject that teaching without rejecting Islam. And so you become a kafir. However, if there's a person who contradicts the ijma, but he doesn't know it's ijma. He thinks there's a legitimate difference of opinion among the scholars. This person, we don't judge him to have left Islam. We don't judge that he's a kafir. Instead, we judge that this person went against the ijma, and that particular saying of his carries no weight. It carries no weight. So what Imam Amin would describe as being outside of Ahl Sunnah, but then later he clarified, well, he means he's with Ahl Sunnah on all the other masail, but on that one issue, he's outside of Ahl Sunnah. I would have described it as saying, no, he's still in Ahl Sunnah. Right. He's a Sunni. But on that one issue, his opinion went against the ijma, and it carries no weight. Like, that opinion is an error, it's a mistake, it can't be followed.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Imam. When we say the person is a Sunni, but he has a mistake, not that he's a mubtadi'. Those are two different things.
Listen, I agree with him, and I humbly disagree. I understand what he's saying. I don't accept, but I understand his point, and I think the overall point that I want to get across. So it's not semantics, and I don't want it to be left to semantics. If you contradict ijma, you in that issue, if you want to say you're not counted as a Sunni, or just in this issue you're not Sunni, you can't contradict the consensus of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Whether you do it knowingly, unknowingly, it's not accepted. And that's the point that I want to make sure we clarify.
Yes.
Right?
That's why I said I think we're in agreement. Because I'm saying going against the ijma, it's either kufr or it's an error of the sort that has to be warned against and corrected. It can't be accepted. Like that saying that goes against the ijma cannot be given any weight. It cannot be seen as legitimate. It cannot be accepted in any way.
See, and here's what the thing, when you say so it's people that contradict issues of aqidah among us, that are issues of ijma. They don't know it. They're not excused.
But that's aqidah.
No, listen to my point. Follow my point. Just follow me. But they need to be taught. They don't even know, they didn't even learn their religion to know that there is a such thing as ijma, period, in the first place, to disagree with. And in their environment, that's all they know. Likewise, so if that's aqidah, imagine in fiqh how many issues of ijma that they would contradict that they don't know. We're talking about the creed, which is easy. Fiqh, of course. But that disagreement never gains validity because you don't know, which is the point that I'm making. Because you don't know, that doesn't mean that that gains validity. It's still bid'ah or kufr, depending the case. Whether you know it or not, that's not the point. That is the case in the religion. Now, the case is that you need to learn the religion, or you need to be taught, but you can't change the religion because you don't know it and make something valid that is not valid. That's my point. So here, the case, when we're talking about why I said no clarity, it's because we agree that prior to this transformation of one individual, he was a card-carrying innovator in creed and in practice. We do agree with that, right? Yes. Now, what we're doing is we're accepting a change that he himself has not explicitly clarified, as if now these issues have been solved because he's not a fanatic of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, when Ibn Taymiyyah had those same issues that contradict consensus that we can't accept. So, and you'll notice during this dialogue, he kept saying Ibn Taymiyyah Ghazali as if it's equal. It's not equal. It's not equal at all. And what we have to be careful as Sunnis is that we don't let this stuff fly. Because what is at stake is the common people who can't distinguish these details. So we have to be clear. And that's what I'm talking about, clarity. Now, what we discuss after clarity is another story, but we have to be clear. We cannot be foggy in these issues. For what is at stake is the common people. And here's the worst thing about it. What was in the thing is to say, we don't have these conversations in public while you're publicly teaching people things that contradict ijma. And we saying this is for scholars only. No.
I find it funny even that
You understand?
I find it
Do
funny.
y'all understand my point? That's all I'm asking.
I find
Whether
it
you
funny.
agree or not, do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I understand and I agree with you. I don't disagree at all. I was just asking for a clarification on a point. But I find I found it funny even in the discussion that Dr. Yasser, he constantly, I mean, he's done it in other videos because I watch his stuff quite a bit, you know, just trying to get an understanding of what's going on in the man's mind, his ideas. For example, he constantly mentions the Taymiyan approach and the Ghazalian approach, or the Taymiyan school and the Ghazali school. But, you know, I was reading one brother in his analysis of the discussion that Dr. Yasser and Sheikh Asrar had. He said that he's speaking as if these are two equally valid competing schools of Aqidah, where in reality, Imam al-Ghazali is not speaking of himself. Imam al-Ghazali is an Imam, but he's speaking as a representative of an entire tradition of hundreds of thousands of scholars that has been checked throughout the generations. And he's one of the greatest scholars of the Ash'ara, but he's speaking as an entire tradition. When you say the Taymiyan school of Aqidah, what is the Taymiyan school? Ibn Taymiyyah was one man. And perhaps his student, Ibn Qayyim, and his other students, who many of them disagreed with their own sheikh and Aqidah and did not take his views. So what is this Taymiyan school? Define it for us. What is it? Because if I say that I follow Imam al-Ghazali radiyallahu anh, everybody knows what Imam al-Ghazali's beliefs are. Imam al-Ghazali's beliefs are the beliefs of the Ash'ara. They're the beliefs of the Imams before him and the beliefs of the Imams from the Ash'ara that came after him. Whereas when somebody says this is the Taymiyan school or the Taymiyan approach to Aqidah, define this approach to Aqidah for us. Who are its men? Because if it's just Ibn Taymiyyah, who was born hundreds of years after the death of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then what is this approach? What are we talking about? Are you really going to base your entire understanding of Aqidah and how to understand your Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala based off the understandings of one man, off the ijtihadat of one man? This makes no sense. Like, to me personally, even, I don't understand how anybody could take this as an approach. And I would say the same thing to a person if I believed, like Sheikh Yasser, Dr. Yasser kept saying, that Imam Ghazali Ibn Taymiyyah. If it was the case that I was just taking my Aqidah from Imam al-Ghazali, I would also be worried if my Aqidah was based off of nothing but the ijtihadat of Imam al-Ghazali. But my Aqidah is not based off just the ijtihadat of Imam al-Ghazali. It's based off of the entire Sunni tradition that Imam al-Ghazali represents and is in line with. So I don't know, that was just another observation I had that I thought of during the whole discussion. Wallahu a'lam.
I thought of something similar when I heard him use the expression, the three modern schools. And I was like, hold up. Because to me, that expression is throwing a lot of shade, man. When he says the three modern schools, it seemed to me he was referring to Ash'ari, Maturidi, and the so-called Athari. You know, I'm like, so by saying that, one, he's trying to elevate Athari as if it's a legitimate madhab to be mentioned alongside Ash'ari and Maturidi, which is at best debatable and could just be hogwash. So by saying three modern schools, he's confusing what the sources of truth are. Okay. But then by throwing in the word modern, he's also throwing shade, trying to make it seem like the Ash'ari and Maturidi schools don't date back to the Salaf. You know, by calling them modern schools. So he's trying to simultaneously, in one little phrase, elevate up the so-called Athari madhab and denigrate the Ash'ari and Maturidi madhabs in one turn of phrase that other people will hear and internalize but not even notice. And he has lots of little phrases like that.
I got something, man. I got to get ready to boogie, man.
Okay.
Now going back to it, and I think this may be one of the underlying things that they had with this approach when they said applied Akida. Because one of the things when they mentioned is like, how does the laity really navigate with so much information? So Dr. Shadi mentioned something near the end. He said about, like a methodology is taking a book and going through that book and make, you read, you studying it for 10 years, and making sure that, he said, we're not going to tell you that there's not other stuff out there, but this is what we're teaching you. And you have this as a foundation. So when you come across all of this other stuff, you'll know how to deal with it effectively because you already have some training, So as opposed to like, because Dr. Yasser was saying in his school, like he teaches his students to basically, you weigh all of the stuff, like, almost if they have the ability to do so, you weigh all of the views, you weigh all of the issues, you weigh all of these things, and then you come to your own conclusion, and that's not how it really works. You know what I'm saying? So, but I think they were saying like the influx of all of this information where people, are watching YouTube clips and all of this stuff, and they're exposed to all of this stuff, and where a lay person doesn't really know how to go through this. And then even they would mention like some of this stuff is really not for the discussion for people because it leads them to more, confusion, So in that sense, I can understand this applied Akida or how to understand it, but not as no like new science or new terminology that they, that Dr. Yasser and others seem to keep coming up with as, like code words for reform, and along those best. But yeah, because this stuff can, for the lay person, they can, I've seen it in the Wahhabi movement, man. People, have these issues exposed to them, and they don't really know what position to take. Someone's telling them this, someone's telling them they out there, and now next thing, now they went back to church. They did all types of things, and Sheikh Asrar said something interesting. He said, if they really had, love for Allah, they wouldn't really, that wouldn't really make a difference. So that's what we got to teach people, how to, come to a level of ma'rifah, along with all of the rules and regulations of Islam. Have your heart tied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that you love Allah more than anything else, especially when things get tight. So, but it was an interesting discussion. And hopefully it opens up doors, because we've tried some of these discussions before, but it seemed like with us, it don't go the same. We try to discuss with people who differ with us, and at least for clarification, and then it turns out like we're attacking and we're doing all this kind of stuff. So in that sense, I'm glad that they were able to pull this kind of thing off. And Sheikh Asrar basically said, he basically said, when you come to the UK, we have a broader discussion and see how that turns out, when this is not like a moderated thing, So, but inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us all understanding. But I do really got to cut out, man. My mom is in the hospital, man. She's not Muslim, but, pray for her well-being, inshallah. And I got to go check on it tomorrow, so I got to get up early.
May Allah give her afiyah, and may your family, inshallah, be well in this time of difficulty.
I mean, Sheikh Dr. Yahya al-Baltimore. It was good pleasure hanging out with you tonight. Alhamdulillah. It's always a pleasure when you come on, mashallah. Listener audience, please excuse us. So I want to tune in tomorrow when we see the replay that we reached our goal. All right. If not, I'm chopping heads, Wu-Tang style. All right, Imam Muawiyah. All right, I gotta go, man. I really do gotta go. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And we'll get ready to close out, but I want to leave, just make sure we leave with clarity, because we can't touch all the issues. And I think it needs to be a series of these discussions. But I want to just put one thing that I'm careful about. And I would like your thoughts on this. This division of deviance, that's what I like to call it, the division of deviance. Ibn Taymiyyah, the head of these deviant ideas, from the 8th century. And his student, Ibn al-Qayyim, or Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, right? Leading the charge in these deviant ideas, especially with the attributes of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala in areas of Aqidah and areas of fiqh, but especially in these areas. Those ideas, like dividing Tawheed into Rububiyyah and Uluhiyyah and Al-Asma wa Sifat, were the same ideas that Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab took as well. They are mentioned in the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and the books of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and his family, they added other issues to extremes that Ibn Taymiyyah didn't do. So people are now neglecting those issues. We don't agree with Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, but still carrying the same bad belief that Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab got from the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and his students. That same vile innovation in creed. And the modern Salafis, who now clear themselves from Wahhabism, and some of them clearing themselves from the Salafism of Rabi al-Madkhali, still carry that same vile belief of Ibn Taymiyyah, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Rabi al-Madkhali, and now the same belief of those guys who, I'm not really Salafi if that's Salafi, and they're making issues that are not the issues we're talking about. And the public don't realize that the issues we're really talking about is belief, and they all carry that same belief. And they have not clarified that we're on the belief of Ahl Sunnah, because those beliefs are the belief of Ahl Bidah. Would you agree with that? Or give me your understanding of what I just described? Either one, I mean, both. I would like all your input.
I think we both agree. Next question.
Boy, y'all like running. Now I'm joking, right? Now I'm joking. Go ahead.
I mean, it's clear. I mean, I think all of us here know Ibn Taymiyyah.
Yeah, but guess what? All of us, maybe us three, but the people listening, they're the ones that may not have clarity. And I think for us, we have to be clear. We can't keep playing politics to get along.
Okay, well, I'll make it more clear. Ibn Taymiyyah, in his books, he has statements that say Allah is similar to human beings. He has statements that say hellfire doesn't even last forever. There are statements attributed to him that Allah doesn't know things until after they happen. Okay, he has said things that are so obviously kufr that no thinking person would think that person is the Sheikh of Islam. Okay, it is very clear and very obvious that many of the ideas that he said were kufr and were opposed to Islam. Okay, we reject those ideas, and we reject the people in our times now who might be following some of those ideas. Is that clear enough, or?
That's explicit, my brother. No. But no, I'm pushing only so we don't leave on the same note of unclarity that I felt when I listened to that video.
Right.
Even though I know the position of Sheikh Asrar, I know the position of Dr. Shadi, I know Dr. Shadi well, but that wasn't my issue, what I know about you. I'm talking about what's left out in the crowd for the people. That's what I'm scared of. Or when I say scared, I'm scared for us as a people who may not identify those things. That's what I'm asking the clarity about. For that reason only.
You're asking me?
Yes.
No, for those ideas that Ibn Taymiyyah or his followers had that contradict ijma' of the Muslims and contradict the ijma' of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, we do not believe that those beliefs are permissible to follow, that it's wajib, it's obligatory for all of the Muslims and their learned people to warn against these beliefs and to teach the aqeedah of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Now, insofar as what those beliefs were, did he make those statements? Do they have another interpretation? That's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother time that can be had with scholarly people. But those ideas in and of themselves, if he did believe these things, if he did say these things, what matters is not the one who said the statement, it's the statements itself. Those statements and those beliefs are wrong and misguided and kufr and perhaps could lead a person into the hellfire. It's wajib to warn against them and to call people to the aqeedah of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Clear?
Clear. And I hope everyone, and when I say that, and your point you made, it's not necessarily so much about the individual, because the individual is saying we're going to discuss the individual because you're the one saying it. But really, it's the issue that we don't want no one to fall in it. Whether you said it or someone else said it, doesn't matter. That issue, we got to protect the belief of the Muslims from those bad beliefs. May Allah give us some clarity. And maybe in another time, if we're up to it, we can explain why these issues are wrong.
Yeah.
More clear.
But I think also that in order for us to have a good and productive dialogue, because this should be the point. I don't want it to be a thing of, I'm not just bashing you to bash you. I want to have a dialogue with you as my brother in Islam. You claim that your ideas are from the Salaful Salih, that these ideas are the ideas of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They are the ideas that were taught by his Sahaba radiyallahu alayhim ajma'in. Okay, demonstrate this to us. Show it to us so we can have, and this is the fruit of clarity though. Be very clear, what exactly do you believe, for both us on the Sunni side and them on the other side. Be very clear about what we believe in all of these different masail in which we differ. And then we can sit down and have an honest discussion with one another about where do these beliefs come from? Why do we hold these beliefs? And then we can move forward. But if people keep running, being unclear, I don't really want to say my position on an issue or anything like that, we'll never get anywhere with anything. Because it's my hope and my desire. Like, for example, I grew up in what you would call a Salafi community, one of the most prominent Salafi communities in North America. Okay. I don't have no type of sob story with the Da'wah to Salafiyya. They were bad to me or this or that. No, I had a very positive experience growing up in my community in my masjid. I still have I have nothing but love in my heart for a lot of those brothers and sisters in that community. Alhamdulillah. But it came to me a point in my life that these ideas and some of the things that were being taught, this just does not make intellectual sense to me. And I don't see it being supported in the tradition that you say that it's being supported by. So I have to go away from these ideas. And I feel like if we just approach this issue from an ilmi perspective, that a lot of this will be solved. I want to have a conversation with you. I want to talk with you. We are going to sit down and talk about these beliefs. Where did we get them from? And how can we come to a greater understanding with each other? Because everyone, both us on the Sunni side and the brothers and sisters that are on the side of the Salafis, everyone here says that they love the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Everybody here says that they love the Salaful Salih. Everyone says that they want to follow them and that their way is the most correct way. Okay. Now, for both sides, it's very simple. Like, bring your evidence if you're truthful. And for the brothers that are on the Salafi side, I'm sorry, the statements of a scholar from the 8th century and the statements of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and modern Salafi scholars are not evidence. These are not the words of the Salaful Salih. And, for us, if, we can just sit down with them and go through each one of the issues we have, whether that's the issues of Asma al-Sifat, Tawheed and Shirk, their mawqif considering Tasawwuf, their mawqif considering, madhabs and taqleed. Okay, we're going to go through each one of these issues and we need to see, what do the classical scholars of al-Islam, starting with the Salaful Salih, actually have to say about these issues? Take away the books of the modern scholars. Take away the books of all of the people attached to your movement. What does the tradition actually say? What does it show? What does it represent? And if we both exercise some intellectual honesty with each other, then I think that the truth will become clear. Wallahu a'lam.
Sheikh Yahya, you have any closing words? I know we wore you out, but it's late.
So I wasn't prepared to close, but there was a question that came up in the comments that I want to answer. One question I saw.
One second, asked, if anyone have questions, we sorry. Let your questions come and we'll take them now. Just repost them if we don't go. So just repost your questions now and we'll close out after the questions. Go ahead, Sheikh.
But someone asked the question, what if the consensus changes to the person who is outside the consensus? So this is back when we were talking about going against consensus. So the person saying, what if the consensus is one thing and this person is on the outside of the consensus? He says, well, what if later the consensus changes and now this opinion is the consensus? What then? Okay, the answer to that question is that can't happen. Okay, consensus is not something that can change. Once it's established, once the consensus is established, then we know it's correct. Because our Prophet ﷺ said that the Ummah will never agree on misguidance. So the fact that there was agreement in that initial era, whatever issue we're talking about, when that issue first emerged, the scholars of that era ruled on it. And if all of the scholars of that era reach the same opinion, then that means there's ijma, there's consensus. No one after that point is permitted to disagree with that consensus. Okay, because it's now known for certain that the consensus is right. So whoever disagrees with it is consciously choosing falsehood over guidance. Okay, that's the answer to the question.
Are there any more questions before we close out? In my closing statement is this. As an on-the-ground imam, I see every single day the effects of lacking clarity and lacking education. I see it regularly. In my communities, the default position is contradicting ijma, falling into beliefs that are kufr or innovated. That's the default. When a person learns Islam, they learn default bad belief, bad practice. That's the default position. And we're trying to fix that. This is not like in Egypt or Hadramaut or Sham and Damascus, where the default is you're Sunni until proven otherwise. No, it's the reverse in our communities. You're given bad ideas from the start, and then the person has to be re-educated. And what makes that worse is when people who know don't speak clearly, don't speak definitive. It's like you giving the sheep to get slaughtered. And you know better. You know, and that for me is a serious issue. I don't say we agree on everything. We don't. And there are some legitimate things we can disagree on. And it's valid. And you remain Sunni and we remain Sunni, no problem. It's ikhtilaf among qualified scholars. And that once that's known, you may have that opinion and I may have that one. We're all making, at the end of the day, all of us are muqallidun. Us. We're all following scholars. The one, and that's another thing, this loose term of sheikh and scholarship, we, the common person, actually think we authorities, and we're not. That's a problem. None of us are authorities. We are muqallidun at the lowest level. When you're around scholars, you know that quickly. But when we're in our environments, we're like ulama. It's false. And sometimes we'll get deluded to actually think we're ulama. I hope not none of us, but that happens. And we will contradict ulama, and then our opinion versus their opinion becomes something we're talking about. Like I showed Imam Muawiyah yesterday, just as example, one Salafi scholar was interpreting a hadith, and the Hufaz in their books said the exact opposite, and he's contradicting them, and he's considered. These are Hufaz. He doesn't even have 1,000 hadith with their chains of narration. He's talking about people who have 100,000 and more, and he's challenging their ideas. Like Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Al-Hafidh al-Nawawi, Sheikh Izzuddin ibn Abdus Salam, Sultan al-Ulama, Al-Hafidh Muqtada al-Zabidi. And this person's contradicting them because he's a scholar from Saudi Arabia and a graduate with a doctorate from the University of Medina. This is insane, but it's common in our communities. They would take that and say, see, the scholars said, what scholars? These are not scholars. These are muqallidun, right? And not at the lowest level of followers. So I want us to understand, I'm not being rude, I'm being honest. And, you know, everyone, we need to know our place so that we all don't sink, you know, and Allah knows best. That's my closing comments.
Well, in that case, Imam Muawiyah, would you do the honors?
Too late, you got it, Sheikh.
أعوذ بالله.
A title of respect. I don't mean Sheikh al-Islam.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه يا رب العالمين. We ask you, O Allah, to show us the truth to be the truth and let us follow it, Ya Allah. And O Allah, we ask you to show us falsehood as falsehood and let us stay away from it, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. We ask you, Ya Allah, to give us firmness upon this religion of Al-Islam, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. We ask you to grant us firmness upon the correct belief in Rabb al-Alameen and the correct belief in your messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Ya Rabb al-Alameen, a belief that is in accordance to that which was passed down from our messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. We ask you, Ya Allah, to give us all of the good in the hereafter, all the good in this world and the good in the hereafter, Ya Rabb al-Alameen, and to save us from the adhab of Jahannam, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. We ask you, Ya Allah, make our last statement in this world, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and that you make our lives, Ya Rabbil Alameen, full of khair and ta'a to you, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and you keep all evil away from us, Ya Rabbil Alameen. And the greatest evil is disobeying you and going against your commands, Ya Rabbil Alameen. And we ask all of this by your blessed names, Ya Rabb, in your lofty attributes, and by the rank of our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and all of the prophets and all of the righteous people, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursaleen, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Bisal asrar al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillah. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط غير المغضوب عليهم.
بارك الله بكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.